Looks like everybody's here. How was lunch? Are you so excited we get to see each other again? Yeah. My day's worse than yours because here's the funny thing. My job description for this week says I play with the siblings. And then sometimes I watch the college kids who are downstairs helping. And somehow I got roped into doing a bunch of presentations. And then today they told me that they're going to videotape the presentation. After I already got here, I didn't get to go to hair and makeup. I didn't get to go to wardrobe. I didn't get to lose 10 pounds before the camera added 10 more. Nothing. So, yeah, what kind of day is that? Don't worry, I'm going to go eat cookie dough in Springfield after this, so that'll probably make me feel better. All right, we're here today for just a quick hour to talk about communication options. And technically, we're already 6 minutes late. So 54 minutes of communication options, which will seem really short by comparison to when I have to talk to you on Wednesday forever. So, all right, are we ready to go? Everybody here? You're going to need to sit over here to click the video links, I think, because this thing doesn't have a way to do that. All right, we just start off with a little fun humor, get ourselves all back into learning mode. This is from a woman who works for Colorado Hands and Voices. Some of you may have read it. We'll whip through it pretty quickly. Top 10 ways you know you have a toddler who is deaf or hard of hearing. Let's see if you can relate. You spend more money on hearing aid batteries, ear molds, or implant cords than some people spend on their summer vacations. Or, worse yet, you vacation at Parent Institute. I am sorry for those of you that think this is your vacation this summer. I think I have bought at least 25 implant cords in the last 7 years. Your vocabulary includes lovely acronyms and abbreviations like DSCC, ISD, IDEA, ASL, SEE, IFSP, IEP, and so on, and so on, and so on. Talk about learning a new language. Number 8, you have at least 5 stories that start with, remember when she threw the hearing aid in the... Anybody have a blank for that? Dog dish, toilet, swimming pool? Toy bucket, We have stories around here a lot. I had a high school girl who lost her implants after she hung them on a broomstick that was in front of her on the school bus. I'm like, you're 16 years old and you took your implant off and hung it on a broomstick? She's like, yeah. Yeah, shocking that you can't find it. You know exactly how many words, signs your child has in his vocabulary. Did anybody have a hearing child first? Like not a statistic we run for the hearing kids, right? Like, oh, they know 27 words. 3 of them are verbs, 4 of them are like, not something we talk about. We have a deaf kid, we're like, got it. I got it written down. I know. You ask me, I will tell you my statistics. Number 6, discussing, looking at, and cleaning up earwax are not really particularly gross activities to you. Some of us were smart enough to adopt our deaf kid at the age of 8, so I never really had to clean his earwax. You guys got in on the game a little too early, so you're probably stuck with it. In less than a minute, you can zero in on the sound of a squealing hearing aid that your toddler has lost. When I hold sweet baby Tate, where are her parents? Yeah, right? You hear that little sweet whistle of hearing aid feedback? Yeah? In class. Who says it? Who has a hearing aid in their backpack? We do that all the time here. Put it on your ear, turn it off. You're wasting the battery. Your audiologist, ENT, early interventionist, and health insurance claims office know you better than your mother and hear from you more often, right? Right? Have you learned so much? Did you ever know hearing aids weren't going to be covered by insurance very readily? Like what? They seem like a medical device to me. Yeah. You can answer the questions, what are those in his ears? Or what's on his head? Why is his head flashing? In your sleep, and sometimes you do. We went a couple years ago on a family vacation to see some national parks, and we went to Wind Cave, and they did a tour down there, and the tour guide's like getting everybody in the mood, and he's getting ready to shut off the lights, and he shuts off the lights, and there's Ian's little cochlear implants like totally ruining his vibe. You can tell the guy was like, oh, sorry. Oh. You can do your vacuuming when your toddler is asleep, right? Sometimes we actually have a family meeting in Ian's bedroom when he's asleep because it doesn't matter if the rest of us are talking. If he's in bed, we can still chat. And the next day we'll be like, oh, you missed that. Oh, you missed that. And, oh, you missed that. And he's like, when do you guys do all this? And last but not least, You never take the ability to communicate, understand, and be understood for granted again. Like, you will be better communicators after this journey, and you will understand so much more about communication and how precious it is in our lives. All right, so we're here at Parent Institute, and respect is a really important part of the week. So all communication options are respected here. We're not in the business of telling you which one to use. We'll give you the information, our experiences, the research that is available, things like that. But we know people who have been successful, families, deaf individuals, hard of hearing individuals that have been successful with every communication option out there. And none of us have found the exact perfect combination that would be one size fits all. So there's not even an answer to what should we do, what is the best choice. There are just so many factors for each individual child and family. We just want you to make an informed decision, though. So sometimes when families come to us and they haven't even heard about all of the communication options and they've already committed to one, that can be really concerning because you want to know about all of the options before you've committed. And so we really try to encourage professionals in the field, the staff that we have here and the staff that come here to work with us, to be sure that the parents, the families, are educated on all the choices. And we mean that throughout their education, not just in these early years, but everything about the IEP later. Like, your rights are to be an informed member of the team. And it's the professional's responsibility to educate you. We hope that you understand that everyday commitment to communication is the key to your child's language development. Your child will spend more hours with you, communicating with you, learning language from you than any other professional that comes in to offer a service. Those are just tools to supplement and enhance what you're doing at home, but you will be the key player. So it will not work if you are not comfortable with the communication method that you've chosen and prepared to readily use it to convey all the communication and language in the home. So we have to commit as parents, which I think you guys are here, which means you've committed to being an informed parent and making that choice. One thing that the parents get hung up on when kids are young is they get really anxious about, well, what if I choose the wrong thing? There are plenty of stories out there of families who have done one thing and then at another point in life, they've needed to make a transition to another communication mode. There are lots of stories of deaf adults who can share with you their journeys of how they've moved between different communication options throughout their lifetimes and their reasons for doing so. So don't hesitate to ask if you feel like something's not working and you need to make that change. You don't have to commit to one thing forever and feel like you're stuck. All right, so one of the first things we need to understand a little bit is just how communication should look from that early infant stage through the 5 to 6 year old stage. That should be representing the ages of your kid that are here. So when they're infants, we want them to be making eye contact and smiling. We want them to be babbling, cooing. We want them to express their emotions those ways. We need them to use their bodies to express themselves. We want them to repeat when we babble to them, understand language by the time they're 8 to 12 months. When we tell them to do something like put on your hat, go get your shoes, we want them to start understanding that language, say their first words, express an entire sentence. So that's what we would see by the time they're about a year. Okay, this is all in the PowerPoint you'll get, so we're going to kind of rush through it. So we go from that at the infant stage to, by the time we're 5 or 6, we jump from this babbling stage in a short 5 years to continuing to expand their vocabulary to 5,000 to 8,000 words. So this is the most intense language learning years of our lifetime. We then become articulate. They start sounding like adults. I was walking with my 6-year-old to the pool the other day at a friend's house, and he used the word perhaps twice in conversation walking down the street. You know, like he sounds like an adult. We want them to be aware that a word can have more than one meaning. He told me a joke yesterday. Why do you not tell a joke while you're ice skating? You don't want the ice to crack up. So he gets the concept that crack up has 2 different meanings. and he should. He's 6 years old. Be aware that, begin to use language to control situations. We want to tell those little people to use their words, and in the absence of words, how are they going to behave? They're going to be screaming, they're going to be hitting by the time they're 6, they're going to be pulling hair and biting. So that's why words are really important to help them mediate situations. We want them to misunderstand words and use them in they often misunderstand words and use them in a humorous situation. I wish I would have had an example of this, but you know those moments where you all look and say, so the other day, I do have an example. Evan said to me, what did he say, an idiom? Something like, if the shoe fits, and then he like stopped and looked like, if that works here, like if that idiom works in this situation, that's what I'm going with. And I was like, yeah, that works. And so you could tell he was like, am I doing that right? So they start to see how things can be funny if you don't get it in the right situation. And then carry on conversations with others. So that's the growth that you're going to see in these early years that we want to see. So this is what we're working toward. Now, another important thing to understand is deaf and hard of hearing kids, especially deaf and hard of hearing kids with multiple disabilities, they'll still need to travel these same stages, but you don't have to be downtrodden or beaten down if they're traveling them slower than the recommended ages. So we obviously want them to travel the stages as close to typical development as possible, but if not, we just want to always be sure that we're being cognizant of where they are and where they need to go. What's that next stage? What are we working toward? So we can always feel like we're being successful and they can feel like they're being successful. Okay, when we talk about communication, I don't know, it's really difficult for you to come here and listen to all the information we're throwing around at you that we've been learning for decades and you've been learning for like a few months or a few years. Like, we definitely have the advantage. So I try to lay it out in some different ways that maybe will be more user-friendly for you. So one thing that we've put together is a communication continuum that's focused on mode of communication. So when we talk about mode, we really work between two extremes, being when you're signing, that's how you're communicating the language, over to speaking. And then the communication modes that we'll talk about today will fall between those two. So I've tried to line them up. There's no perfect answer to how to talk about each of the communication options available to you. But if you look, American Sign Language would obviously be signed. We don't use our voices when we're using American Sign Language. We don't use English grammar. It's its own language, no voice necessary. Over here to listening and spoken language. And then things like signed English, total communication, and cued speech will fall in the middle between the two extremes. Apparently this has like some kind of like, yeah, I don't know if it's 1997 around here or what, but we just got a pointer. Okay, so then if you focus communication and you think about it in the term of language instead of mode, then you would be working between the two languages most commonly we're discussing here with deaf and hard of hearing children is ASL and then English. So some of the options, American Sign Language is ASL, spoken English, written English, and cued speech, those are only using English. And then things like total communication and signed exact English, those things are trying to kind of bring these two together. But ASL and English are separate languages. Okay, another thing we want to talk to parents about, because we just like to talk and talk and talk and talk, is language versus speech. So already I've heard some of you are trying to tell me your thoughts and ask me your questions about your children. And sometimes like we're talking about language and then you're talking about their speech development. And then we start talking about their language development again and you're talking about your speech. It's important to monitor both how your child's language is developing and their speech, but understand that they're two separate units. So language is a set of shared rules that allow people to express their ideas in a meaningful way. Okay, we can express it verbally, we can write, we can sign, we can cue, we can make other gestures. Those are all part of our linguistic system. Speech is talking. That's only one way to express language. You have to have muscle coordination, you have to have tongue coordination, you have to have your lips and your jaw, all the things the speech pathologists will work on. They're trying to get your child to produce speech. But that doesn't dictate how you're providing language. Okay. Another important thought about language. The first 3 years of life are the most critical language development years. Had we all taken, what high school languages did we take in this room? What did you take in high school? You had to take probably 2 years. French. What else? Spanish. Okay, so how much Spanish do you know today? Muy pequeño. Ah, right. You can tell me you know very little of it. How many years did you study it? 4.5 years for about 50 minutes a day, 180 days of school. So that's pretty significant time commitment. You studied algebra that long, you're probably better at it. You probably studied algebra less, like a couple years. But if you would have taken those 4.5 years of Spanish instruction and put them into your environment when you were 0 to 3 years old, how much Spanish would you have known? A lot more. That's what your brain can do when it's young with language. So I know you all got this surprising news and you weren't expecting to be on this journey, but now is not the time to sit back and wonder how it's going to turn out. Now is the time to do everything possible to get this to turn out for your child the best that you can. Because if we wait out these early years to kind of see how it goes, we're missing this really critical time that physiologically we can't get it back. We'll never get to replicate what the brain can do now with language. Language is caught, not taught. Another challenge is they set us down in a class in high school and tried to teach us the language. Had they just shipped us to Mexico for 4.5 years, we would have all come out bilingual. But that's not what they did. They tried to explain each part to us, and we don't want to find ourselves in that situation where we're only learning the target language when the professionals are coming in or when kindergarten starts. We have to have the language in the environment accessible to the child at all times, because language is just acquired from all of the things going on in the environment. So we have to surround our kids with people who can communicate with them. We have to get the whole family on board. We have to do our very best to give the language access. Children thrive in language-rich environments. I don't know who are the parents to the little dude that learned all the signs before lunch. Yeah. I don't know what you did with that kid, but he is like amazing. I'm thinking about taking him home with me. I said, I have 4 kids. He's like, then you'll have 5. And I was like, all right, let's do it, man. But you can tell that he is really primed for learning. Like, he is engaged, he is assertive, he is right there with me every step of the way. That's the kind of child we need to be raising, someone who can really engage in learning. They're curious, they're assertive. Those are the kids who learn the most. So he's clearly been in a language-rich environment. I don't know how you, did you guys bilingual at home? Did you tell me you speak Swahili or something too, or who was that? It's English? Did you just, been using, he knows some sign language. Yeah, you can tell he's just really attuned to like learning language. So later, call me when he's like a literature professor. Okay, language is the foundation for literacy. Right now, your 0 to 3-year-olds aren't learning how to read, as they shouldn't be. One lady did tell me her kid is starting to read. But later, all the language that they're working on now will be what they're building upon for their literacy. Okay, so everyone's answers to this slide would be different. So we have all of these factors that make our situations unique. We have your child, their auditory abilities, their type of amplification that they're using, their vision, their breathing and vocal abilities, and their motor skills. All of those things are going to impact what communication option works best for them. Then you have your family, so then it gets a little bigger. We can focus on the child, but then who's going to give them the language? It has to be these next people out from him. We have language and culture. How many languages do you have in your home? How proficient are the people in your home at the language? Time. I don't know about you, but we both work full-time at our house. So for me, that's okay. I come here and I can practice cute speech or visual phonics or ASL or how to do interventions with listening and spoken language. But my husband, he goes to a different job, not with deaf people all day, and he puts in his 7 hours and he has a commute. And then he comes home, like when we raised 4 kids, when does he have the time to learn and devote to some of these? Like, it had to be part of our consideration. Which option are we going to be able to do well? Resources, we live in Jacksonville, Illinois, so we're around a lot of resources for deaf people, but we meet students all the time who are all over the great state of Illinois, and some of their families have heard of hardly any resources for deaf and hard of hearing kids. So part of your decision has to be what's available to you. Or is your family able to move to the program that you want? Educational goals. Not every child's on the same path. So what is the end goal here for them? And what's your comfort? If you're uncomfortable with a communication option, then you're never going to do it. So don't pick one that you can't really do comfortably. Okay. So we're going to start working through the communication options. Let me check the time. Okay. Are we ready? The first option here is ASL English bilingualism. So this is when we're using two languages and we're keeping them separate. So in this type of programming, they would typically consider that the child's first or primary language would be ASL, and then it's a complete language, it's all its own, so that's what they would be focusing on in the early years. And then English is taught through print later. So at what age do you really start teaching print? Some preschool programs are doing it. Definitely kindergarten and first grade are very focused on learning how to read print. So then that's where you get the English is through the mode of print, and you get the ASL through the mode of signing, and they're two separate languages. Okay? Can you click on the top video link? Where is she? Oh my gosh. Little sisters have to do everything. So what did you notice about this video? So their communication option here for this family is ASL English bilingualism. So what's the focus? What's the approximate age of these kids, do you think? 2. That's probably true. I don't know them. I'm guessing with you. What did you notice about the language that they're using? What? Sign language. They're using American Sign Language, so they're not voicing. They're not trying to make the sounds of English or any spoken language on their mouth. They're not moving their mouths for all of this. How do they get the dad's attention? Kicking a seat. I'm guessing the dad might be deaf too. So this is obviously a family that's chosen American Sign Language. When will these students start learning English? What? Probably kindergarten. Most deaf kids do get the advantage of going to school, usually pretty full time at the age of 3. So they'll probably get introduced to English print then. And their parents probably already are pointing things out to them, like the McDonald's arches or the Disney symbol or their names or whatever letters are on their socks or their shirt that day. But print will be the mode that they'll be getting the English through. They don't seem to be using amplification as an approach to learning English. All right, the bottom link. You know, if the director won't eat the lunch, I don't know, what do you guys think? Do you think that's indicative of like a quality issue? So the family responsibility here would be you have to provide access to deaf or hearing adults who are fluent in ASL. If that's going to be the main language your child's supposed to be learning in the early years, and you don't know ASL, then you have to figure out how you're going to give them that language model and how quickly you can learn ASL. Most research shows that I already taught you this morning. It takes how long to learn a new language? 3 to 5 years to become proficient in conversation, and 7 to 10 years of academic proficiency. So this would be a commitment of you finding the resources around you to provide more language model while you're on your journey to learn ASL. You would need to become fluent in ASL to communicate fully with the child. We don't want to just be choosing ASL and then only being able to say, we're going to go to the store and now we're going to see grandma. Do you want more cookies? Is that a full language? No, that's just a couple signs every few words. That's not going to cut it for long-term language development. So we have to really be able to find those resources for you guys and for the child. Learn about deaf culture. ASL is its own language. It has its own culture and community. You have to create a print-rich environment so that you can start that English development, so when they're developing the two languages simultaneously. This link right here, we're not going to have time. Let's open this one up and just show them. Hands and Voices, have you guys heard of that organization? We got a not hands in the air, Hands and Voices. Okay. So Hands and Voices has an article about each of the communication options available to parents like you. And they have parent questions, and they've written answers. They have a lot of information. Can you open it or not? What are you doing? I could have brought a student to do the job better than her. Wow. So here's the example. This is the one for American Sign Language. What is it? It gives the definition and some background of the development of the approach. Scroll. What issues, what's going on with it? What questions should parents be asking? So this is available on the handsandvoices.org website for every communication option. And reading it once isn't going to be all you need. You're going to have to read it and let it marinate and think about it and keep going back to see if you have all of your factors are considered and you're getting everything you need to have a successful journey with your communication option. Okay, close it out. Let's go. Okay. Next. All right, signing exact English and signed English. Some people really want to split hairs here. I don't know what to tell you. They're very similar. One is a little looser. That's why they added the word exact to the other. Okay, so it's a sign language system that represents literal English with a sign for every word. A famous example that people always want to talk about when you're going through Deaf Ed is like butterfly, and that you wouldn't sign it as butterfly because you're showing that it's a compound word, things like that. Some people who use signed English would still sign butterfly though, but the concept being that it's not conceptual like ASL, it's literal English. And it uses initialization like the sign rose. If you're signing rose in ASL, you would sign flower, you would finger spell rose to be more specific because the concept is it's a flower, the specific name is finger spelled. In signed exact English, you would initialize with that initial R. I think I showed you an example this morning with the I am going to the store. So you would have that initialization of the first letter, and you would use that to use the sign. Prefixes, tense, word endings, you would put your EDs or your INGs on the end of the words. You would use the signs in the English word order. So that's how it exists kind of between the concept of ASL and English, because it's not fully representing either. Okay. That clip on the bottom left, thanks. This is a mom who's using signed English with her child. She's reading the book Brown Bear, Brown Bear. She has more than one kid, for those of you trying to deal with that reality.
What do you see? I see a red bird looking at me. Good signing, Bert. Okay. You said red bird. What do you see? I see a yellow duck looking at me. Okay, you sign yellow duck. What do you see?
Slow down a little bit.
I see a blue horse looking at me. Good job. Blue horse, what do you see? I see a green frog looking at me. Okay, you sign green frog. What do you see? I see a purple cat looking at me. Good signing, good. Purple cat. What do you see? I see a white dog looking at me. White dog. What do you see? I see a black sheep looking at me. Black sheep. What do you see? I see a goldfish looking at me. Oh, we know this one. Remember, this is gold. Goldfish. What do you see? I see a teacher looking at me. Oh, here she is. Here's the teacher. Teacher, what do you see? What does she see? I see children looking at me.
Judah.
Children, children, what do you see? We see. Okay, let's do the signs. A brown bear, a red bird, a yellow duck, a blue horse, good, a green frog, a purple cat, a white dog, a black sheep, a goldfish, and a teacher looking at us. That's what we see. The end! You did it! You say, bye, I'm a reader. I read. Sign it to the mama. Mama, I read. What do you see? I see a red bird looking at me. Good signing, Burke. Okay. You say, red bird, what do you see? I see.
Okay, I think we all know the rest of the book. What did you notice about the communication here that's different from the ASL bilingual option? She's using what? She's speaking. When you use sign English, you are usually speaking. The child's probably using amplification, so that you're using your voice. So then what syntax, what order of the words are you using? English word order. You're using the function words of English. And the, those words are being represented through the air. Did anybody see how she signed looking? She used the initialization of the L, and then she added the ending of the ing. You guys are so good today. Okay, so that's an example. And so this child, when they go to read print, they'll be familiar with the order of the words. They'll be familiar with words having endings. They don't see all of the phonemes, so it won't be as you learned how to read as far as them knowing how to sound out every word and knowing every letter, but they have some more of what that English will be represented on the page.
Is it to do with the age, the differentiate of the age with these two different English, like the exact English or just the sign English?
No, these are just different schools of thought and people who have led the charge for them. So some books are published under the sign exact English, that title, and some there's another school of thought that signed English, but it doesn't have to be as exact because the thinking there is that it's really hard to sign all of this and keep up with your rate of speech. So did you hear how slowly she was reading the book? So what happens when she wants to read Harry Potter to the kid? Right? I mean, he's going to start at 11 and be finished with it at 15 because that last book is like as big as, so it's not as conducive. So then when you drop some of the words and make it a little looser, but when you drop the words, if the child's depending on the visual, then they're not getting the exact representation of the English. Okay. Good question. Oh, I forgot I have the power this year. They just got me this. $3 at Walmart. Okay, the family responsibility here. You have to become fluent again in the sign system. You have to have access to other people using the sign system while you're becoming fluent. You would have to consistently sign while you're speaking to the child, and they don't mean signing every third or fourth word, they mean you have to be able to sign the entire message while you're speaking to the child. And it's probably safer to say anytime you're speaking around the child. If I'm talking to my husband, I would need to be representing that English, because my hearing kids, are they hearing that language? Are they able to catch things from our conversations? Some inappropriate things, and some things I have to tell them later they shouldn't have overheard, and they don't need to worry about. But all the same, it's part of their language development. And so the deaf and hard of hearing kid needs to be able to catch language in the environment too. Consistent use of amplification is key here. If you're going to be voicing, the intent is you want the child to be hearing it, and you want the child to be able to produce as best they can the speech that they're able back to you. Okay, this is the other flyer from Hands and Voices you can read later. Uh-oh. Okay. You know, some research shows that oldest children have the highest IQ. I can tell you, at my house, we debunk that research. We are outliers right here. I can also tell you why. When I was in kindergarten, this one over here, who always wanted to be a teacher, she got a hold of third grade materials, and it was the only student book and teacher book we had. So every day after kindergarten, what did I have to come home and do? Third grade math and third grade reading, right? So that's, I really owe it to her. I think I wrote a speech about it one time. It was probably really sweet. All right, total communication. Have you guys heard of this one? This is like the great umbrella of communication options. You can almost put anything under it and call whatever you're doing a version of total communication. But it can be dangerous because it's not a method, it's a philosophy. And what you know about philosophical thoughts are, they don't always trickle down to effective action, right? So throwing a bunch of stuff under an umbrella and just calling it with the label total communication doesn't necessarily then turn into a child having a really clean language model and a really clear path to language and literacy. So it's kind of good that it's so flexible and challenging when you move between IEP teams, when you have new professionals join your team. If everyone has a different version, a different philosophy of what this looks like, it can get implemented for your kid a lot of different ways. So I think that's an important thing to consider. It incorporates all forms of communication, formal signs that are English-based, finger spelling, body language, natural gesturing, listening, lip reading, speech, it's all under there. Goal is to optimize language development in the most effective way for the child. So whatever the child's responding to the best and learning the best with, then we're going to use more of that in this philosophy. Okay. The family responsibility. Become fluent in whatever type of sign system or cueing, whatever you're putting under this choice. Consistently sign, consistently speak, consistently use amplification, consistently use responding to the child. Expectations need to be consistent for how they respond to you. Here's a classroom example here. And someone was describing their child's classroom to me earlier, and it made me think of this video, actually. So what happens sometimes if you have a bunch of different deaf kids coming in from different
I believe that every child can learn, even if they come with multiple disabilities with that deafness, or they come and they are just deaf, but I think they all can learn somehow, some way. So we work hard to try to make that happen.
Why do you think that Granddad wanted to walk to a high hill? Why not low?
Okay, what kind of language is she using here? What English words did you hear? Why did Granddad want to walk to the high hill? Psh, what's that? Is that it? Do we say that in the middle of an English sentence? What's she doing there? What'd she transition over to? She started going, ASL. And when she was doing this sign English, she added an ending and a function word, and then she dropped two. So it's a real mix here of what language is the child getting. Are they getting an ASL language model? Are they getting an English language model? No, they're just existing somewhere between because probably some of these students are using more English and some of these students are using more sign language. So what are the pros and cons of this? Pros, what are the pros? Everyone's included. You get peers in the classroom. You have a low incidence disability. You can group them together. Yep, that can be very positive. We need our kids to be around peers. Yep, what can be the cons of this situation? The language. They may not get everything they need. It's kind of a general, broad approach, and so it might not be directly specified to the type of communication that each child needs. So this is something that I see probably the most when I move between classrooms and deaf ed. And I always have a lot of questions and concerns about what's best here. Okay, can you turn it back on, please?
Low heel. Because the high heel we can stand and see everything below. If it's a low heel, you won't be able to see because of the trees and everything. So, my favorite, it's best. Mole says my favorite. Woo! We go up and walk. Good.
So this kid is responding, and what's the teacher doing? She's voicing, she's interpreting. Sometimes we call that mediating communication. Okay. You can close it out. We need to move on. Why is the teacher doing that? Some students can hear, and maybe some students can't sign. So maybe some kids there can hear when the teacher's giving the English, but maybe they don't understand. This kid was responding in ASL. There was no voicing. It wasn't an English word order. They were using conceptual signs like, ooh. It's very ASL. So the teacher's trying to facilitate how to work with this diverse group of students. Did we talk about this? So again, family responsibilities similar to those we've seen. Become fluent in how you're going to sign. Consistently use it. If you don't use it, they're not going to get it. And encourage consistent use of amplification if that's part of your total communication package. Okay, cued speech. I think we covered this morning. A mode of communicating using the mouth and hand to visually distinguish the phonemes of a spoken language. It was developed to improve literacy skills. There's your handy dandy card. Can you click on that video link, please? This is just an example of an adult deaf cuer. She's explaining the master's program at Gallaudet University. It just shows you a fluid cuer.
Welcome to the Graduate School here at Gallaudet University. The Graduate School offers numerous programs at the certificate, master's, specialist, and doctoral levels that prepare students for a variety of scholarly and professional careers. For example, we prepare highly qualified teachers, audiologists, speech pathologists, interpreters, linguists, and counselors. I am pleased to welcome you to Gallaudet. Thank you for your interest in learning about the graduate program. Here, we take a lot of pride in our rich heritage, distinguished faculty and staff, and ASL English bilingual environment. At the graduate school, we work towards preparing deaf and hard of hearing and hearing students, scholars, leaders, and practitioners with the resources to excel in the professions and disciplines. This includes providing research and scholarly activities to inform theory and practice among the 12 different graduate programs offered here at Gallaudet, including ASL and Deaf Studies, Deaf History, Hearing, Speech, and Language Sciences, Linguistics, Administration and Supervision, Counseling, Physical Education and Recreation, Psychology, Education, Foundations and Research, Education, Interpretation, Social Work. We also feature an excellent visual language and visual learning research center, which you can learn further about on this tour.
Okay, we get the point. So what's do you notice about this communication? She's cueing. What else is she doing? She's speaking, because remember we have to cue with our hand and we have to move our mouth. Do we have to speak when we're cueing? You don't have to voice, but she is choosing to do that. You can do them simultaneously. Which of the words that she's saying is she representing with cued speech? All of them. All of the sounds that she's saying, she's representing, which means the endings, the prefixes, all of that is, all the function words, they're all being represented here.
In cute speech, if you're not speaking, how is accents? I just noticed one of them had a really strong southern accent.
Uh-huh.
So some of the pronunciations of certain words, like especially in like the endings,
Uh-huh.
sometimes are so different
Yeah.
depending upon your
Yeah.
location of where you live.
Right, so even if you're not speaking, you're going to cue it how you're moving your mouth for it, because you have to move your mouth. So you still have to mouth it. So today you saw the other lady in the green shirt was watching our cute speech class, and she grew up in New Jersey, and I grew up in Indiana. So when we talk about going on a tour, I say tour, like a two-syllable word, and she says tour, like a T-O-R, tour, like I tore the paper. So she cues tour, and I cue tour. Well, she was my son's teacher for a few years, and sometimes he would tell me, what'd you say? And I would cue it again, and he would say, oh, Mrs. Fry, and he would tell me how she says it. But he never misunderstood that we were using the same word because of the context and all of the language going into it. He just noted that she says that sound and you say that sound. I also say the word treasure with a long A. I've now learned not to because I've lived in Illinois since I was 19. But I used to say treasure and measure, and I've had to learn how to say treasure and measure, but just this weekend at the pool I said, did you guys find all of the treasure? And my husband's like, probably not, because we're not in Indiana. I'm like, so, but he would still understand the word. He just knew that I had an accent or she has an accent different. So yeah, that's a good question, but you can represent accents when you cue. Okay, so what's the family's responsibility if you take this as your communication option? You would need to learn the system. Remember, cued speech is not another language. So you don't have the responsibility of learning another language, but you do have the responsibility of learning the mode, the system to apply to the language of your home. You have to consistently cue. You don't have to voice, but you do have to consistently cue. And you have to encourage the use of amplification if desired. I know profoundly deaf people who grew up on cued speech whose implants, because of the anatomy, were not working, and he is smarter and better at English than I am, so it did not slow him down. He just had to get all of his English visually, so you can use implants in spoken language while you're cueing, or you don't have to. So that's something to consider. This is a parent perspective video. I think this is one that Ange really likes. But it's 2:04, so you're going to have to watch it later on your own. This parent is just explaining how they made the transition between choosing to take the journey into cued speech. And it's a really good explanation of just a real-world family trying to give their daughter the mainstream language of our culture, English. Okay, listening and spoken language. So we have two options that kind of fall under that label, and they're very adamantly two different options. I've already heard some of you talking about the professionals who adamantly tell you what you need to be doing with these two different options. And it's good to be passionate and committed to what you're trying to help people do. So auditory oral uses your residual hearing or your speech reading, your natural gestures to develop spoken language. So that's auditory oral. Auditory verbal would use listening as the only sense. So they don't want so much of the gesturing and the looking to the mouth. They want you to depend solely on the hearing. And they just try to restrict the cues, like the visual cueing or the speech reading and the signs. So if you click on the video on the bottom left,
Logan, get your scissors. Say scissors. Good. Put them in your bag. Okay, Logan, say markers. Good.
Where
Say
is
folder. Say blue folder.
Yes.
You're not even trying. He's so excited, doesn't even care. Yeah, put it in the big one. And a big one. Ow, Dad. Tell him no.
Logan, what's this? What is it?
Okay, so this is Logan. I'm guessing he's packing for the first day of school. What'd you notice about this communication option? They're using English. They're only using spoken English. There's no other sign system or cute speech system being used. Okay, what else did we notice? How is it different from what auditory verbal might look like? What? They're speaking, but we speak in both of them, so that's the same.
It's listening.
He was listening. He was repeating. Were his parents letting him look at their mouth, and were they probably gesturing to them? Like his dad was right there just saying, hey, like so he can look and read his lips, and his dad's using the dinosaur as a prop for what he's doing. So it's kind of just a fairly organic experience for Logan. So auditory verbal, this is when a therapist came into the home to work with a child, and you'll notice in this video that she'll do some masking. So she's really trying to just focus on the listening and not use the other tools that are part of a more global community.
Good job. You picked the bowl. Okay, we're going to put another one there. Book. Thank you. What's that one? Ooh, boots, that's right. Okay. Ball.
So he's working on some words. I think they all have the same initial consonant sound. And initial consonant, words that have similar sounds can be hard to hear. So you can tell they're really trying to train him to be able to catch the small differences among words so that he can primarily depend on his auditory abilities. Okay? And she's masking, which is a common approach to auditory verbal therapy sessions. The family responsibility for both auditory oral and auditory verbal would be learn the training methods. You have to be kind of prepared to do things. Your professionals will come in and they'll show you how to do it, and the expectation then is that that's how you're approaching the learning between sessions with them. Incorporate it into all parts of the child's daily routine and play activities. Provide a language-rich environment. They at first were getting Logan to say something, and then they tried to get him to say blue something. So they were taking it from a one-word, repeating to a two-word, adding the adjective noun together. So they want you to be incorporating it into all of their activities. They want consistent use of amplification here. This is a Clark school video for, I think it's one of the teachers or parents using that. Okay, so we've worked through, well, I should quiz you. What have we learned about communication options? We've learned about ASL English bilingual, signed exact English and signed English, total communication, cued speech, auditory oral, auditory verbal. Okay, this last one is an option. I think one of you told me your son was using a board. Okay, so this is an augmentative communication device. I personally haven't worked with a lot of students who are using that device. I work among professionals who are being trained for that. So it can be pictures, it can be objects. Nowadays it can be an iPad app, it can be lots of different devices. The professionals usually come into the school and train the staff, the one-on-one aide, the teachers, the staff that need to be trained with it. This one actually changes pretty quickly with technology these days. Things get changed quickly. So I know for the last 2 or 3 years we've had to bring people in as we've gotten students with different equipment here. And you can write that into an IEP. Little fun fact, any training for staff that is needed for your child, there's a section of the IEP that we want to put it in there so that everybody gets the training that they need. What? Hint, hint, hint. You can actually, some really savvy parents have even gotten parent training and family training into an IEP. I'm not that good. I don't know, but goals, I guess. But no, seriously, is Andrea coming this week? Andrea Marwa is IEP queen, and she'll be here on Thursday, and she would be able to tell you much more about that.
Augmentative and alternative communication, also known as AAC, is a way for an individual to communicate when they do not have the physical ability to use verbal speech or writing. AAC systems are designed to help people express their thoughts, needs, wants, and ideas. AAC can range from a simple set of picture symbols on a communication board up to a computer system that is programmed to speak with words or messages. AAC might be a temporary system that is used while a child's speech and language.
You can watch the rest of the clip later. One thing that came up in conversations this morning is, are they talking about expressive or receptive communication here? Expressive. So if your child's using this as their expressive communication, you still have the other piece of the language and communication puzzle where you have to still make a choice about the communication option for what language they're going to be receiving. Okay, so you still have to have a way to represent language because you're not going to be using the board to show them language. Do you know what I'm saying? So that's when kind of the parents and the child can go on a different path as far as how they're producing the language and the communication. So it's something to keep in mind. Oh, I'm in charge. Got it. Okay, factors to consider. Let's review once again because now we've learned about all the communication options. So again, we have to look at our child's auditory ability, the type of amplification they have, their vision, their breathing and vocal abilities, and their motor abilities with the different necessary parts of our bodies. The family, we have to look at our languages and our cultures of our homes. We have to be honest about what kind of time we have to go on these different paths. We have to look at our resources available to us and how we're going to access resources. It's probably really lucky to be us instead of our predecessors because probably with the internet and online things we have access to things that the parents who were here 40 years ago could have only dreamed of. So that's nice. Educational goals. So realistically, what are the educational goals for the child? And the comfort that we have. We're not going to do something effectively that we're not comfortable with, and that has to be comfort for not just the mom, also the dad, the siblings. There's a lot of people to consider in this family unit, and it can be really complicated. I've yet to get through an IEP. Wait, I think I went to one. I've been the parent of a deaf child for 8 years this summer. I think I've gone to one IEP meeting without crying. Right? My husband's never cried. I cry every time, except once. And I don't even know the number of times that it's caused a little bit of a tiff between my husband and I, right? Or a little bit of challenge between the siblings, a little fight bubbles up to the surface because of a communication or a language issue. So those are all things that we're still working on. I've noticed now the kids are, as they get older, are getting more interested in being better communicators, so I'm able to take some more resources home. But we had to be realistic about what role they could play in Ian's language development in the early years, because we had also just dropped off a new brother who was older than them from China, and they were a little bit like, what are you doing? And so there's just all these factors, and I think it's funny sometimes when I hear professionals act like, well, it's just simple, you just have to pick something. You just have to do it. I'm like, how many kids do you have? What do you do all day? How many years have you been learning this? I mean, what's your husband like? Mine kind of shuts down when he gets frustrated, those kind of things. And so I always joke about how it's way more complicated. I was already working with deaf kids when I adopted, and so we probably were a bit overly optimistic about how we could just take the journey because we were already educated about deafness and we could do it. And we've been humbled greatly by the experience and how much work it's taken, even when we got to start a little bit ahead of the game. And so props to you for whatever work you've already put in and the work you're getting ready to continue doing. Any questions for me? Wow, that's so nice. Oh, shoot. What is it?
Right, so people seemingly have very strong feelings about the preference for communication, right, as they should. It's very personal. And even professionals seemingly have very different opinions about what is the best approach. Mm-hmm. And I mean, with all the different levels of hearing loss and different spectrums and reasons why, are any of these approaches less than effective or less than ideal given specific situations?
Yeah, so I think he's asking about the efficacy of the different approaches. So I'm getting ready to choose this really important thing for my family and my child, and I want to know what are the chances that this is going to play out for us, what's the end results here. So another unfortunate part of the puzzle for deaf kids is that deafness is considered a low incidence disability. So on top of occurring rarely by comparison to others, the way it occurs rarely, and it occurs so differently because you have this whole spectrum of hearing and then you have this whole spectrum of amplification. To get a group of children together and follow them and have a statistically significant research outcome is very hard. So we don't have this like, yes, we found that this is the answer, because we have a couple studies that say if you use cued speech, they become very proficient at phonemic awareness. Or Dr. Nancy Young was at a presentation I was sharing the other day, and she said about 50% of the kids that her office has tracked academically, once they get implanted, about half of them are being successful in the long run with keeping up with their hearing counterparts academically. You know, we have all these pockets of information, but we don't have a really strong research-based answer. And that's why professionals have so many different, every professional takes their own journey. When you're trained to work with deaf kids, I don't know if you know this, but you're trained to work in general deaf ed in some country or in some states, in some college programs, and in other master's programs, you're trained specifically to work with listening and spoken language. So sometimes your professionals haven't even been trained across the options, so they're also just educated about one. So I hate to tell you that I don't know which one would work best most of the time. What my family felt most comfortable doing, and as a professional, what I felt comfortable doing, which I think I expressed to you today, was to go and learn more about typical language and literacy development for a hearing child, and to try to find the communication option that gave me the closest development I could get to that, and use what I learned in those classes to then teach my son or teach my students how to read and how to acquire language, because there's much more research available in the mainstream for typically developing kids, and I put my eggs in the basket that's where I would get my best answers. Does that make sense? So I look to the broader research in the field of language and literacy than specific to the deafness. And so I try to be as pure as I can to what that tells me to do. Oh, and remember at the beginning I told you, we know a deaf adult who succeeded with any of these options. Like, we can tell you at least 1 or 2 or 3 success stories, and so that's the crazy thing. We find ourselves sometimes at staff meetings when we meet a deaf person and they tell us about our journey, but what did your parents do at home? But what exactly, how did they communicate? Like, was it a sign, or was it like sign English? Did they, did you have to move your, we ask them all these questions because we're constantly trying to figure out. And I've heard all the answers. One deaf woman that works here, she had deaf parents and they used ASL English bilingualism, but she has stories as early as being 2 or 3 and finding notes from her mom and in her shoes when she went to put them on, go to the kitchen and find 5 pennies on the counter, just constantly exposing her to English because her parents used ASL. So they worked so hard, they were just so engaged. And we know this other woman who works here who has never made a grammatical error in an email, pages and pages. She has impeccable English, and she didn't grow up with listening and spoken language. Her language is probably signed English, but she doesn't ever voice. And then you hear these, it's like we hear all the stories and we're like, how did you do it? So everyone's journey, it's just all the factors play into it for every family. So, and then we know people who have learned ASL later in life, and they sign native ASL users, so clearly they had that early language development in English and it support, we just know all. Good question, sorry about the answer, I don't know. If I ever find, I'll call you. I found the answer. Okay, so the greatest takeaway, unfortunately, isn't that we know the answer. The greatest takeaway is it's your child, and it's your choice. And on Wednesday, we'll talk a lot about literacy and language development for children, and that it can be about communication is a really important part of it, but also just communicating and using language and pushing your child and supporting them and encouraging them and making language the center, however you're communicating it and whatever language you're using it, making it the center of your life and making this your life's work is going to give you your best results probably. So your child, your choice, and you have lots of options for how you can push them and keep moving them forward.